Really warm welcome, everybody, to this conversation with Larry Achiampong. And this evening, and a big thanks to my colleagues at Talbot Rice and at ECA for preparing and for hosting this evening. In case there's anyone out there who hasn't experienced the context of the exhibition that Larry's work is a part of, it's called The Normal, and it's on at Talbot Rice Gallery here in Edinburgh until the end of August. What we hope we've achieved with that show is to break open a number of the wounds and maybe the scabs of the pandemic, alongside its more uplifting, life-affirming, change-oriented effects. But most of all, we wanted the exhibition to reflect the awakenings, the social, conceptual, anthropocenic awakenings that we've all been through, and as we know, has gone on and on and on. And thus so did our research. So what became as a snapshot response became a much longer and more tangled set of constructs or threads within the exhibition. And for us as a team, it was curated in real time, which is really an unusual thing to do. And its unusualness is why we as a team are so grateful to the artists who go along that journey with us. It's a leap of faith to accept an invitation to be part of something that's still forming and to ride that wave of change, of development, of none of us knowing 100% where we'd end up, or indeed where the pandemic would spit us out, if indeed it ever does. And Larry Achiampong is an artist who rode that journey with us. And as he tells you about the works he's created here and elsewhere, I really hope you'll have a window into the idea that these are gifts that artists are giving when they work with us as organizations. They both reveal and they heal. And with artworks that here in Larry's case at the University of Edinburgh are going to live on and support our institutional development long into the future. I have a brief biography of Larry before I hand you over to him. And he'll then be in conversation with James Clegg, our curator, who you just heard from at TRG at the end. So born in 1984 in London, Larry Achiampong currently lives and works in London and Essex. He received his BA from University of Westminster in London and his MA in sculpture from the Slade School of Fine Art, also in London. It's a little hard to know where to start with his exhibitions, but had you been lucky enough to travel to the Liverpool Biennale this year, you would have seen his Pan-African flags for the Relic Travellers Alliance throughout the city. Or another recent group exhibition I really wanted to see but couldn't, Rock Against Racism, Militant Entertainment, 1976 to 82 at the Delaware Pavilion. He's been included in exhibitions over the past few years in Nantes, Berlin, ZKM in Karlsruhe, Singapore for the Biennale, the Diaspora Pavilion of the Venice Biennale, and he has had solo exhibitions at John Hansard Gallery in Southampton, The Line, the public art walk, as well as Art on the Underground, both in London, at Primary in Nottingham, 019 in Ghent, Eastside Projects in Birmingham, the Logan Centre at the University of Chicago, and at Copperfield in London. And I'll just add a big thank you to Will Lunn and Team Copperfield for all your support and of your work and our work with Larry. It's a really great gallery, and I was delighted to see them starting to work with Alberta Whittle as well, who's Scotland's next Venice Biennale presentation. Hooray! Until recently, Larry has been a tutor on the photography MA program at the Royal College of Art. And in 2019, he received the Paul Hamlin Artist Award in recognition of his practice, and was also awarded the Stanley Picker Fellowship in 2020. And I am delighted to hear that next year, Turner Contemporary will mount the first major solo exhibition of his work. And so finally, before I hand over, a huge thank you, Larry. It's been a complete joy to work with you, to conspire with you. And I want to thank you for enriching this exhibition, for taking us into really interesting and I believe very fertile institutional territory. That sounds very mysterious, but all will be revealed. And really, I would do it all again in a second. Thank you for being such a wonderful artist, a wonderful agitator, and I now invite you to take over.
Thanks very much, Tess. Really, really much appreciated. And yeah, also just like a massive thanks to, the whole team um, at the gallery. James, you've been incredible. It's really weird to work on a show and not physically be there, and to have people literally working around the clock and being really careful from the approach to how the work is written about, to how it's considered, or how it's to be positioned and so on. So, nothing but respect for that. Although I'm not physically there, and it's always, annoying not to be able to meet and mix with some of the other artists, I've felt very supported and welcomed. So it's just great tonight to be able to talk about this part of my practice, which, if I'm honest, this is probably, there are two firsts actually. It's the first time that I'll be kind of like talking in depth, I think, about the chalkboard series, which some refer to as the Detention series. But in a way, this group show is really kind of like the first kind of major kind of showing of the work, outside of some solo shows here and there, which of course I will go into. So without further ado, I'll start sharing my screen and we'll get started. So I wanted to begin with, I guess, showing some imagery of what my studio kind of was, but also in a lot of ways still is, by going back, the last 10 or so years. The image on the right, you can see my son, who will be 13 in in just over a month's time. And the reason why I'm showing this is, I guess, to talk about my approach to making. Um, I guess recently, in the last couple of years, where my trajectory's kind of picked up. I get questions from people, especially students, saying, "Oh, like you must have like loads of of like assistants, and like some kind of factory or whatnot." And it's like, well, actually, no. I have a live work unit in Purfleet, which is quite lovely in Essex. It's nice out there. It's nice and quiet. It's enough for me to keep my head down. Then I have a really small studio space that I drive to in Bow, where I'm able to throw around wet materials. But again, this image is very important because it shows part of the heart of the studio. As you can see, there's a MacBook which is kind of hooked up to an MPC, and a mixer, and a range of other digital equipment. And when I came to the end of my MA at the Slade, or even before then, actually, I knew that I wouldn't have the kind of money to maintain a practice that my peers did. By that, of course, I'm talking about those who have that monetary privilege. And and at the time where the internet was picking up much more as a thing, and you had social media outlets such as MySpace, you know that for me kind of, those kind of instances for me became a pinpoint to focus on, to utilize, to push my work out, because I had no gallery. It's only within like recent years that, of course, Copperfield have represent me, whom of which, of course, thanks to them as well in relation to working on this show. Big thanks to Will. Um, so of course, working without all those kinds of like bells and whistles, I guess I relied on the know-how that I had, growing up in East London, and then also partially in Dagenham in Essex, on the little means that I had working, digitally, and just at a scale that I could manage in order to create things that for me could kind of push a dynamic. So this kind of visual, this scene, is where I was able to create some of the record-based projects that I did with the showroom, or the Boko African Popular Music Archives Foundation in Accra, in Ghana. So moving on, like I said, this is the first time that I'm talking about the Detention series of works, which is really special for me, in that I have a wide kind of ranging practice that utilizes text, prose, sculpture, sound. Obviously, it depends on the concept or the moment to which I kind of, respond to. But of course, focusing on the Detention series, or its inception more specifically. I guess for me, I have to take you back to the 90s when, I'm going to, secondary school. The internet really isn't a thing, and cartoons that kind of like have a bit of a tint of adult humor, like the Simpsons, were things that I was really into. um, One of the things I really loved about the Simpsons show, as you can see with some of these images, which are from more recent seasons of the series, was the approach to humor through satire, but also this ability to break through the fourth wall, to think about kind of current events or happenings, and um, how they might be challenged through a certain kind of question, through a ridiculous phrase that is repeated. And of course, these blackboards weren't alien to me as a kid. Growing up, I was part of that generation where we were just about still utilizing those, and then moving into the really horrible plastic kind of boards with the weird kind of markers. I imagine now it's obviously much more digital based. My son comes back with the computer that the school gave to him from this moment in time with COVID, and similar to my 7-year-old daughter. So it's within this, so kind of moving on from that and coming into a point around 2007. I was invited to work on a small solo show at 198 Gallery, or at least what it was called at the time, 198 Gallery. I believe it's now called 198 Contemporary Arts. And at the time, Eva Longret, who's I believe one of the other directors of Frieze London now, was curator there, and we did a studio visit at the studio in the Slate, because I couldn't possibly afford at the time any kind of so-called artist studio, and she approached me with the potential of creating a solo show. And at the time, I was just making all kinds of things, experimenting with film from a kind of really lo-fi perspective and point of view. I was playing around with photography through my Glyph series, with the use of the Gollywog kind of iconography that is kind of like made famous within the Robertsons brand, and so on. And then I was kind of playing around with the idea of creating a kind of chalkboard that referenced, or in its own kind of meme-like way, referenced that of the Simpsons. And of course, within these two pieces, I was thinking a lot about the kind of, I guess, the cultural conversations at the time, at least, that were happening in the news at that point in time. Think it was Grand Theft Auto 4, may have been Grand Theft Auto 4, that had just been released, and there were conversations or reports and debates regarding video games. Are they turning children into violent maniacs, and so on? And then similarly, the same old silly conversation with regards to hip hop. As you can see, I will not listen to 50 Cent. So of course, at that point in time, 50 Cent was like blowing up. I think his second album, had just come out, and so that was really the type of sound that was popular hip hop wise, or even just music in general. And for me, I found it quite absurd, because I'd grown up with these aspects of culture. I'm still a gamer myself. I learned a lot regarding aspects of science, even an understanding of art in some ways, by playing video games. There are other people who I know personally who utilize video games for their social function. So this kind of very, should I say, reductive, and even in some respects bigoted kind of point of view with regards to that, or even certain musical cultures or Black culture in general, for me, was an issue that I wanted to approach, and so that's what I did with this work at the time. So that's 2007, and of course, like we jumped around 9 years to 2016, in which I had my first international solo show at the Logan Center exhibitions in Chicago, and I was invited by Yosomi Molo, who I believe is now at Serpentine Gallery in London. It's great to be welcoming her back into London. I was invited by her to work on a solo show that would culminate a range of practices I'd been experimenting with. At the time, I'd created, I guess, yeah, the first kind of like really significant moving image film in my practice, Sunday's Best, which focused on conversations around my own childhood and upbringing, but a focus into faith practices and the fusion or the change thereof as a result of histories of British imperialism and Christian, colonialism. Amongst that, within our conversations, Yosomi came across these blackboards that I was kind of like playing around with, but I hadn't shown or shown any of the work within a public context, and she asked me to talk about it. And kind of between that point in 2007 and moving towards this point in time in 2016, I guess the way that I continued to build my inspiration, or should I say palette of sentences and phrases and so on, became more and more inspired by the internet, became more and more inspired by social media. So of course, by this point in time, Facebook and the likes of Instagram, Twitter are a thing. And I guess, as somebody who, I don't use those platforms as much anymore. I've only got an Instagram and then a LinkedIn, which I hardly use at all. But Instagram I use to kind of put the message out there with the work, and again, kind of like connect to people who aren't likely going to go to gallery spaces based around being, kind of like gaslit or pushed to the periphery, depending on class, race, gender, and more. And so, as somebody who uses Instagram mostly, I probably not more probably not so much so in recent times, in the last probably say like a year, but over the years of use, I'd come across really interesting kind of like posts where people would kind of make their rants or arguments around different kind of topical issues, and within that, you find people also then coming up with additional conversations, or they kind of pick out from that. It's almost like an essay, or like a layman's essay that is literally alive, and in order to keep up with it, you gotta read right through the other story. But then the issue with that, of course, is that the algorithm pushes whatever was last there away, so you've got to kind of like be quick on that. And I'd take a lot of screenshots on my phone, and kind of like take on inspiration from different different kind of conversations or ideas, or and then I would tweak them. I would tweak them in order to kind of like fit the size of these blackboards, which are kind of like roughly a meter by a meter and a half plus, give or take. So this this of course continued. It has continued within this series, The Last of Us, which takes its name from the popular video game by Naughty Dog. I don't know how many of you play video games or are aware of the game The Last of Us, but I'll just give you some quick context to the game. that way it will give an understanding as to, you know, the inception of this series of works. But The Last of Us is a video game that is set um, during a pandemic that strikes the world, and this particular pandemic is a kind of like disease, kind of like infectious virus that, upon infecting human beings, turns them essentially into zombies, and then over a longer period of time, essentially turns them into mushrooms, which I kind of find weird, amazing, and disgusting all in the same breath. But it's a really compelling video game. It tells a really incredible um, parental story, and a story regarding surrogacy, and also, I guess, the grey area between uh, being a hero and being a villain. But what was really important for me in referencing that, with regards to this opportunity in which I was invited by an organization called Shrinking Space, and then also the Royal Botanical Gardens Kew in Wakehurst, um, I was invited to consider some of their archive, or maybe all of it, in order to create new works that would exist for a group show that would last a couple of weekends. So to consider artworks that could exist in an ephemeral manner. So I wasn't treating these blackboards in a way that, you know, they needed to survive the summer heat at the time, or even, you know, potential rainfall, or being touched. If that happened, then it happened. I was fine with those potential interventions. But also, of course, when you look into some of the words, or the phrases within the work, um, it kind of digs a bit deeper into um, issues that relate, of course, plant life, the environment, the Anthropocene, um, and also, in some respects, the relationship with colonization. Really, the really incredible thing with um, the Royal Botanical Gardens Kew's archive is they have an array of thousands upon thousands of seeds, which, of course, you know, been stolen, taken from around the planet. And so, for me, this was a really interesting space in which to um, think about not just the work that I was making with the Blackboards, the Last of Us series at the time, but also to continue developing another project, which I have a couple of slides to show at the end of, titled Relic Traveler, which is a speculative project that um, considers the period that we're kind of like living in now, the results of Brexit, and the shockwave, or should I say, even the inspiration that it's kind of like ignited in terms of an acceleration of nationalism across the West. Um, but also within this project, and significantly considering um, the development of the African Union as a result of a passport program that actually does exist at this moment in time, which um, in its, you know, hopeful manifestation, would allow Africans to travel amongst all of the states without a problem of visa. So, you know, there was a lot of work that was being made at that point in time. I was thinking about this idea of these seeds, and migration, and writing about that, making that become a part of a testimonial kind of voiceover that you hear within the Relic Traveler Part 2, and then potentially the Part 3 films. So I was collaborating at the time with amazing journalist and writer Ada Amotro, who I've continued to collaborate with, and in fact, actually, we're working on a new ambitious film, which will hopefully be released next year, with my first major solo show at Turner Contemporary in Margate. So again, we continue with the Blackboards, this time with another solo show, but regionally in the UK, in Nottingham, and specifically the Primary Gallery. I've had an ongoing kind of like relationship of a really great conversation with Nikki Russell, whom what I really appreciated about our process of developing this show, which was titled Divided Nation, but kind of had the DED in divided kind of crossed out to also um, create the word divination. Um, for me to really think about that with regards to my own Akan Ashanti heritage, the idea of or practice of seeing the future through considering the past. So there are many kind of like phrases and sayings that we have, one of which Sankofa, meaning to go back and to get it, to go back and to retrieve something that may have been lost. And to consider that in relation to the future ahead of oneself, that the understanding that the future is not this very kind of like, you know, Western idea of being linear, but in fact it's there's it's more circular in a way, and even those circles, you know, they kind of spiral in and out, you know, so it has much more of a shape with that. And you know, during our conversations we talked about the presentation of the detention series, but we kind of we started to think more creatively about how they could exist rather than simply just these, you know, these forms that would stand almost, you know, like paintings on a wall. But as you can probably see with what's kind of like holding them up, these types of panels which were designed for the show, we talked a lot about, and especially the relationship with the blackboards and that of the space that that primary kind of inhabits, which used to be a primary school in itself. So for me, in a way, there was this kind of revisiting, kind of like nostalgic moment of going to you know, physical school. I believe this would have been a primary school, and so in terms of its kind of like physical layout, is very similar to the primary school that I went to in East London, school called Globe School, which I believe is still about. But in terms of the building's kind of existence, I believe it would have been built around the Victorian era. So you have that very kind of similar, like kind of like coldish feel of vibe with like the, you know, the floors that are very much undone, and you know the brick walls that are kind of like painted a kind of strange color throughout different points of primary where they have artist studios. You can kind of still see and feel some of those remnants. So to, you know, create these you know, these panels that would just go around, you know, one floor of the exhibition space was it felt like it wasn't real. We weren't kind of entirely transforming the environment into something else, but actually considering, you know, the history of that space. I guess another thing to note with some of these um, texts here is, at this point I started to invite phrases from different scripts that I was writing for different films. Again, at this point in time, I would be developing some of the Relic Traveler films, and I would sometimes isolate elements within some of the testimonies that exist within the films that I felt stood out quite importantly. So, "Our lives are political because our bodies are" is taken straight from I think it's the last line actually from Relic One, which came out in 2017. And then, of course, as you can see, you know, Captain America's superpower is Aryan privilege, which, you know, has a kind of this connection with Batman's superpower being wealth. You know, kind of really stripping down, um, you know, what for me is kind of like behind a lot of superheroes or super villains within comics. And again, the way that satire or, you know, the fourth wall exists as a you know uh, uh, an ingredient for conversation around what we experience in the now, in the present. So that brings us to the works that, of course, are on display at Talbot Rice. Um, it's difficult to talk about it in a physical kind of sense about work that I was not physically able to be around. So um, if for those of you who may not have seen the show or read anything regarding the inception of this series of works, um, all of the pieces were created entirely new for the show, but they were all created under my instruction. And what was great about this process, which I really have Tessa to thank for, was the discussion around the possibility of getting people uh, with high kind of like ranking privilege within the faculties or the university to actually write these phrases. So to really kind of like flip the ball on its head as to who's kind of like who's writing um, in this kind of manner, but then also I guess that reminder of what the words or the sentences that are being applied actually mean. And one of the things that I spoke about to Tessa that really continues to concern me really was, of course, going back just over a year ago when people, witnessed, one of many snuff movies. In this case, the murder of George Floyd. Um, of course, there was a kind of, I would say, an agitation, of course, that took place around the world, which of course followed, masses of protest and voices kind of like calling out in solidarity. Some of them, white. But for me, as a black person, I remember the feeling of being very fatigued. That as somebody, not even simply just as an artist who's made work that is talking about these issues for, yeah, I guess 3 decades, which makes me feel old now. But amongst many of my other comrades and kinfolk whom have experienced and continue to experience not simply just racism but other forms of prejudice. Um, to see this rollout of black boxes, for example, on Instagram or institutions around the world using the same old keywords to say, "Oh, we're doing this work," or we're listening. Um, just felt like a slap in the face, really. And one might even debate with me that, oh, well, maybe you're being a bit pessimistic. Well, I'd argue back and say that, if I were pessimistic, then my work would be way different and probably way darker. I think, if you look between the lines of my work, there's a hell of a lot of optimism. And especially even as a parent raising two incredible black children, in a world that I've said before and I'll continue to say again, is designed to crush them. So this opportunity to really think about the history of this series of works was quite an opportunity that I'm not sure I thought I would really have, because I think there are areas of my practice that people, they just disregard, which I'm not chasing people to get them to like things. I make what I make, and if you're not interested in it, you're not. That's fine. That's just the way that it works. um but it was interesting that Tessa and the team kind of like took intrigue as to the possibilities of what this work is kind of doing, not simply just physically, but then thinking, on a cultural level, historically, its relationship with schools, the school system, of course, which I haven't managed to even talk much about. We don't have much time. And to roll all of those things and to consider even, the beast that is the algorithm, which, lurks within, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or whatnot. And, the heroes of today become villains of tomorrow. And then we reset or we repeat, we cut, we paste, we copy, and everything else in between. And yeah, I just thought I'd finish off with a couple of images from a work from within a series which I spoke about, of course, Relic Traveller, Reliquary 2, which of course involves the use of text and prose, specifically in this case with this work, a letter to my children, literally within the earlier moments of the first lockdown, in which I was separated from my kids for 3 months. The work played in 4 parts at the Piccadilly Lights in London with Circa, and for the remaining 3 nights, including tonight, every 8:21 p.m. if you happen to be around. Not sure if any of you are based in London. Elements of my work will play. So within these last 3 nights, you'll see imagery or symbolism, especially with regard to some of the new Pan-African flags, some of which showcased at the Liverpool Biennial. All right, so yeah, that's the end of my slide presentation.
Larry, before you stop sharing with us, I wonder, because some of the text on the boards is quite small in these details, and I just wonder if you'd want to go back through the new commissions and almost read the text that's on the board so that people can take that in as well.
Definitely. So, so with this piece we have, everybody wants to be black until it's time to be black. This one is escaped the meat space to find cyberspace, only to try to escape to return to the meat space. This one is begging for a seat at the table built of our bones. And this one is shouting Black Lives Matter with algorithms and intentions that expired with last year's milk. Sorry, I've got to kind of zoom in myself actually. And then your festival out on the backs of our pain. So again, like I was saying before, you know, this kind of this period or moment in which, you know, whether it's institutions or individuals saying, oh, you know, I'm woke or enlightened, or, oh yeah, you know, I saw this reading list that was given to me of, you know, books that really a lot of people should have been reading anyhow. And it's kind of almost like, I guess, treating of this moment like it is a festival. Of course, something which I was critical of in talking about with regard to Mark Quinn's sculpture, which he erected in Bristol. Cool. So where do you want to take it now, James? Are we talking together? Are we, yeah, what are we doing?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to stop sharing, Larry, and we'll sort of come back into the room together. That's a brilliant presentation. And thanks at the end there for sort of sharing with us the slogans as well. I know some people are interested in, I guess, the process that goes into creating those slogans in the first place. And, you know, I think you've brought us in there to some of the context and the politics that go behind them. But I wonder if you'd want to almost talk about the language and the way that you kind of sharpen them and you work on them poetically to get these points as you want them. Yeah,
I mean, you know, I guess even my approach to the use of the English language, or even battering thereof, you know, I think a lot about my own, you know, upbringing in East London or later on Essex. You know, the use of slang, and also within different, of course, you know, groups of like society. I tend to kind of pull that out and tease that, and, you know, apply that, weave that into some of the sentences sometimes. I then also think about phrases within different points of popular culture that might be to do with, you know, films, or, you know, various aspects of cinema, or even video games, you know. So the meat space kind of chalkboard focuses on, I forget the name of the video game. Yeah, I forget the name of it, but it's a Nintendo game, and it's kind of like set in a kind of like a point between a kind of like parallel universe of Earth and that of this kind of weird yeah, I guess digital kind of space in which these chimera kind of exist, and you as this kind of human kind of police character have to join with your body with this chimera in order to, you know, fight enemies and so on. And the game brought about a lot of really interesting philosophies regarding, you know, the digital realm. So, you know, like I said before, you know, video games, they continue to inspire me. There's so much philosophy that is woven into them as artworks. I mean, of course, not all of them are artworks. Some of them are just terrible, in the same way that, you know, you might come across a terrible piece of music or, you know, film or whatever. So, you know, that process of the use of language is very, you know, I don't kind of sit there with a little sketchbook just like listing loads of these things. Like I said, I'll take screenshots on my phone. I think, you know, of course, yourself, James, and Tessa, you're aware of that in the process when we're talking about it. And, you know, I managed to show some of those screenshots of different areas of, you know, influence, for example. And for me, that's how the work kind of stays fresh, is that, you know, I don't want to kind of like create this like, you know, Bible book list of things, which, you know, then that's the new thing or whatnot. You know, I could be having a conversation with someone today, and they might say something in particular, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, okay, kind of gets my my brain kind of wired, and then I might even, you know, research some of the words or the meanings to what they said. So it's you know, the weird thing is that, formally speaking, physically, it's a very boring kind of looking thing. It's just a blackboard with chalk on it. But I think it rewards a possibility for a range of types of conversation if you spend time with the work. Sorry.
Yeah, I can see we're getting in other questions, Larry, that I think will probably take us back into aspects of your process and influence. But maybe just take a slightly different angle for a few moments. Well, people hopefully contribute a few more questions, but maybe we could focus a bit on that kind of institutional element of these particular works of the Detention series. And some of our colleagues who manage the art collection in the Centre for Research Collections, who I think are currently in the process of acquiring 2 of the 5 works at Talbot Rice Gallery. But they sent us a few interesting questions. So I thought I'd share those with you, Larry.
Sure.
The first is, what impact do you hope your work will have on an institution when it's taken into their collection?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I guess the first thing that I hope, which in a way I think is a big hope, because I think what happens, I'm just going to be honest, I think what happens to collections a lot of the time, unfortunately, in archives is a place where things kind of go to die. But I do have faith that it can agitate conscious conversation, but also that, you know, some people might happen on that, like by chance. You know, to give you an example for myself, kind of happening upon things by chance, is to think about my my relationship with INIVA, or the International Institute of Visual Arts, of which I'm a board member at the moment. But I literally happened upon that place by chance as a kid when I was on my BA, you know, utilizing a library at University of Westminster that was just completely whitewashed and westernized beyond any kind of point that students now would even consider. Like, you know, some students think they had it difficult now, you know, check back then. But what was amazing for me was, you know, but by being, you know, told about this incredible place, that it wasn't kind of stationed within the Rivington Place building yet at that point in time, was being able to go to this archive. And I loved going into libraries at the time, you know, picking out things, but like reading about, you know, heroes by the likes of, you know, Eddie Chambers, Rashida Ream, Sonia Boyce, Labena Himid, Rami Gabadamosi, like all of the and all of these different like conversations and arguments and things that they were having. Like it for me, it was like reading comic books, you know, like literally, like, and these different heroes with their own separate types of like abilities or approach to, you know, deconstructing and talking about culture, was a really special thing. So if I get to even have a tiny ounce of what they kind of had of an effect on me, and that happens with others, then yeah, job done.
Great. Well, I think our colleagues are really sort of thinking about how these objects are going to be used in teaching and learning, and I'm sure they'll be sort of picking that up with you to some degree, Larry, just to make sure that these objects don't go and die. I think that was the last thing they want from them. So yeah, another interesting question. I suppose this is imagining the works entering the collection for a period of time and almost asking you to like project back on them from some future moment. But do you think there's something about Detention series that speaks of where we are now, historically speaking?
Yeah, I think, with what I was talking about with regard to, how time is processed, how it's processed from a kind of Western point of view. You think about like, things like modernism and futurism, this idea that the past is like obsolete. And then when, me kind of like mentioning some of my cultural heritage and approach to time, which is like, well, actually, we're human beings, and human beings, they tend to repeat mistakes quite a lot. I think, the essence of the chalkboards kind of is in that, it's through this repeating of something that you might have heard, but you weren't listening to. And of course, there's a difference between hearing and listening. You're listening, you are taking in the information. If you heard something, well, it's literally something that kind of just hit another kind of like point or sense of your body, but just doesn't resonate on a deeper kind of framework or level. So again, like I said, very much in a similar kind of approach to how social media can work, the way that you take a meme, you copy, you paste that, and it grows and it manifests and it dies, and then something else kind of grows from that, an offshoot. That's kind of how I see the Blackboards Detention series, in terms of how it's just this, it's this constant flux of conversation with regards to time, its existence, and it's kind of also non-existence in a way. Again, within the confines of this show and what coronavirus has kind of like done, time is processed differently. I know it's definitely processed differently for me now. Like, it just doesn't feel like the same thing. Urgency, of course, is still important. It's kind of like risen even further, but an element that I'm kind of personally grateful for, and I try to kind of keep pushing back on, is like I don't need to travel so much, although it's been great to travel to different places and build research and so on. But I think the art scene can kind of like be guilty of like getting people to kind of like move at like an unnatural kind of like flow or speed, to which isn't even human. And what happens with that, of course, is people burn out. So this kind of this period of time being broken and reconfigured or reconsidered is something that I'm taking more and more note of.
Yeah, time's an interesting term, isn't it, in relation to these subjects, because, as you say, it's so multi-layered, and there's that aspect of this work talking about different periods of technology as well, from the blackboards, which might seem old world or archaic now, through to social media, and I guess the different possibilities of being that they open up. And then, of course, there's that sense of time that someone has to spend writing out these lines.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we could talk a bit more about that, about how you consider that as time spent thinking. I mean, how do you relate to these institutional figures who've been brought in to make this work with us, to collaborate with us, and their time spent writing these lines?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I don't know. There's different parts of me at play. There's part of me that is hopeful that upon taking these set of commands and listening to them and listening to what's embedded within those words, that there's some kind of resonance. But, there's the other part of me as a practitioner that, as far as I'm concerned, it's up to the viewer to kind of to do the work once the work is made, in a way, or once the process is set in motion. I don't have any control over that, and I'm not sure I'd really want to. I don't want to control the way that people think. I want to know what people think, and I think based on my childhood experiences and growing up, existing within an atmosphere such as the art scene, there are points where so much of it is quite superficial, actually, and I hate that. I want someone to tell me the truth, like, even if you're a bit of an idiot, just say it. You know what I mean? Like, I'd have more kind of even an ounce of respect for that than just kind of pretending to agree with things. Again, like I say, that kind of festival like nature. Don't say racism is bad because it's popular. Like, who's that serving? You know what I mean? Other than, companies that are making money. So it's really up to them. That's not up to me. I feel like, it's not too dissimilar to, processes for other works. Once I've finished the film or I've done a performance, well, I've pushed the energy out there, really. And, it's up to, in this case, obviously, the people who kind of like participated in this specific set of instructions as to where they take that. And that's kind of the point of it all, really. Without kind of throwing too many puns in. Yeah, is there anything that's being learned? Have you learned anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's when we take people around the galleries, I suppose it's a challenging thing, isn't it? People often want answers. They want to know how to be led. They almost want sometimes a kind of advice for how to read certain things. So I guess by asking people to interpret the boards and then act accordingly, you're kind of asking the hardest of questions there.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Which is why, like I say, like it's kind of up to them at that point. I think, to add anything else, kind of expectation wise, it begins to get a bit, I don't know, unrealistic, and in some ways perhaps like performative in a way that I don't think is helpful or functional, really. So, yeah.
Another interesting question we got from collections relates to the idea of performance, and I guess these works as performance as much as they are, paintings or drawings or texts. And there's been a development where institutions have really changed their collecting policy in order to be able to accommodate a performance piece. And would you ever imagine that this work might evolve in that way, whereby a collection might acquire the rights to reproduce this gesture to get other heads of institutions or other managerial figures to remake the work time and time again?
I think that, yeah, I mean, there are always different types of, possibilities. Of course, from the presentation that I've shown, the slides, you will have seen an evolution, perhaps, if you will, of a really simple approach of like, some, young Black East London boy taking interest from, television, popular culture, and makes its way through to, the digital space and social media. Yeah, I think that the opportunities that were presented within this show have kind of taught me that there are other potentials. I mean, I'd spend time kind of brewing on it. I don't feel like it's, I won't rush out and be like, okay, well, we're gonna do blackboards this way, and I don't know, we're gonna have some kind of late night at Tate and everyone's going to be writing on blackboards. Like, no, this isn't the way that I do things. So I think, every process has its point of learning. Of course, the show isn't even over yet, and unfortunately, because of the obvious, I'm not able to travel up north. But I think they're like I said, they're already minutiae of things that I've, kind of, taken from the process that I think could be considered, even if not with this work, but then with other works or other approaches, if that makes sense.
So we've got another question here from Petra Reed, who's done performance as far as in the past. And she's talking about the kind of trend, and I guess this is with people like Jeff Bezos, heading out into space, for people to recirculate Gil Scott-Heron's work, Whitey on the Moon.
Oh yeah.
And she's just asking if you see any parallels between your work and the work of Gil Scott-Heron.
Oh wow! Like, I mean, I don't even have space and time to talk about Gil Scott-Heron, but if we rewind in terms of all of those slides back to 2011 and even earlier, when my son was born, before my son was born, like Gil Scott-Heron stuff was what I was just pumping in my earphones all the time, or even in the studio at the Slade. I remember I even got into trouble with some of the other studio holders because the music was too loud and it was a bit violent and all of that crap. But I mean, Gil Scott, like, yeah, I wish that I'd have got to met someone in Gil Scott-Heron, to have actually met them. I loved his final piece of work, I'm New Here, and then of course the remix We're New Here, the remix album with that JVXX created, which I think kind of created a beautiful kind of mishmash of like the cold harshness of New York married with that of London or even the UK, that concrete, yeah, I mean, yeah, we can talk for ages on Gil Scott-Heron. I haven't listened to some of his stuff for a while because I go through periods of just not listening to any kind of music. I love music, but sometimes I love silence actually. But yeah, I mean, in such a way, massive, inspiration to how I would say even like I considered the use of wordplay actually, or even utilize that in performance, in prose, in the films that I make. It's all there. You listen or listen again, and you'll find it. So yeah, thanks for that question. That's I probably wouldn't have pulled that out.
So we've got another question that's been dropped into the chat, and I wonder if I should drop Tessa into the hot seat on this one, if Tessa's still listening, just asking what response we got from university staff when they were asked to write on the blackboards. And I suppose, Tessa, I just wonder if we could talk a little bit more about the approaches and the sort of process.
I mean, it was what we wanted to do, and what Larry and I discussed was also try to create something like a picture of what management in this really, really, really large organization is. And I went to Juan Cruz first, who's the principal of Edinburgh College of Art, and he was dead keen, all in. No, you, Larry, you worked with Juan and the RCA in the past, so Juan's really familiar with Larry's work. Juan's work is also text-based, so it was a really natural relationship, I suppose. And then it was actually with Juan that we started thinking about other forms, or he kind of alerted me to another form of management, which was USA. So it is actually the Student Association president who has written one of the boards, and I was really grateful to Juan to reminding me that there's that student management that goes on as well. Of course, our vice chancellor is one of the writers, and when he agreed to do it, I was quite moved actually, because for someone at the top of this big Russell Group 16th century university, it's no small thing to engage yourself in an artwork that is, it's not about it really creating risk or creating problems, but I just say I was quite moved that he dived in with such enthusiasm. And then Deborah Kiambe, who's actually here. I see you on the list there, Deborah, who's the rector of the university. And Deborah was just such a brilliant and vocal force when there she is. I don't know if we can switch her over to being a panelist to say a few things. There's a bit of magic on Zoom that can do that. Don't know if you would even want to, Deborah, but yeah, it was just really brilliant that she came in as well. So, I mean, everybody was very quickly kind of entranced by the project. And when we did it in the gallery, there were actually really quite sincere conversations going on about the university strategy, about ECA strategy, about different lives in relation to equalities, equity, and diversity and inclusion. But also remembering childhood. And 3 of our writers had been forced to do blackboards in their education. They remembered it vividly. So there was a real conversation about what detention meant. One of the writers tried to get into detention because it allowed him to have one-on-one time with his favorite teachers. So there's just a really different attitude and recollection that went on. And it was quite a powerful experience. And, the 2 that are going into our collections here in the university, Deborah Kiambe's and Peter Matheson's, the vice chancellors, it's a real opportunity for those conversations and what they mean to us as an institution, but culturally, those reflections, everything you've discussed today, Larry, to live on and on and on. Yeah, it's been a really, really special experience.
Great, thanks, Tessa. Sorry for suddenly dropping you in there, but we really probably will round this up shortly, unless anyone sort of quickly drops questions into the Q&A box. I mean, Larry, it's been a brilliant talk, and I guess I don't want to finish on too much of a cliche question, but because we are part of Edinburgh College of Art, it's always nice to ask artists what advice they might give to emerging artists and those who are currently practicing their trade.
Oh gosh. Emerging artists. Yeah, because there's so many things to talk about, but I think one of the most important things is you're reminding yourself why you're doing what you're doing. Unfortunately, validation from studio visits or things like that, if you rely upon that kind of thing, you will get crushed and, burnt to smithereens. I've been there, and, it's great to have good conversations. It's also kind of cool to have bad conversations too, because it reminds you, it grounds you. But don't rely on an institution for like validation and things like that. Again, for me, like I said, time is very important, and I've been thinking loads about the last almost 20 years of doing this, and I've got stories that you can put into a memoir or a novel. Do you know what I mean? And so much of that is filled with rejection on so many levels, whether to do with my class, my race, my heritage, my kind of like East London or Essex twang, all of that kind of stuff, and even just my different approach to making things, because I refuse to, think that, only Derrida or Lacan can be God. Why can't Gil Scott Heron, or why can't Lauryn Hill, or do you know what I mean? This is, I am new here because I'm not from here. Do you know what I mean? And you got to do it your way. You got to make it up. You got to make that up as you go along. It's good to have people to ally on as well. Link in with the people who have similar conversations that are happening. Understand that there are going to be differences too, even those of you who may be kinfolk. But you must keep reminding yourself about the reasons why you're doing what you're doing. That's really important. I think it's easy to lose yourself in all of this. So, there's a long future, and yeah, that's what I would say.